In the great state of Maryland, there lies a small town called Poolesville. Settled in 1760 by brothers John Poole and Joseph Poole, Poolesville has been a bastion of agriculture and small-town living for over 260 years. As a magnet school, in close proximity to the fourth and sixth most diverse cities in the U.S., Poolesville High School pulls from across the county to give it a 55% minority enrollment. Today, Poolesville sees its diverse high school as essential to the town's character, as evidenced by the strong and successful community campaign to renovate its aging building. But it wasn't always like this. In 1956, as Poolesville sought to integrate its whites-only high school, over 250 protesters blocked the entrance to prevent 9 African American students from entering the building, forever impacting the lives of those involved. George Barnes Jr., a bright pupil and an outstanding athlete who overcame hardships as one of the first African American students in Poolesville history to attend the high school. Connie Morella, a kind teacher who helped and inspired all pupils alike, later engaged in a successful path in politics, serving in the House of Representatives for over a decade and a half. And Everett Sever, a Maryland segregationist who found his moment of fame snuffed out by the morality of the Poolesville community, never to be heard from again. For 10 days, the African American families faced the worst days of their lives.
His house and home was violated. Trash was thrown into his yard. Fires were set, crosses were burned, and in the town of Poolesville, for the simple reason that they decided that they wanted an education past 8th grade.
Poolesville was pro-Confederate in the war. There was a lynching 2 blocks from this building, right, at the end of the 19th century. And so it's had all these wonderful things, but the same thing is true of the country as a whole, right? This country, all men created equal. You create a real democracy, sort of the first true democracy in almost 1,000 years, and this kind of scale, and yet there are people who've not sort of lived that dream yet.
On May 17, 1954, Brown v. Board of Education was a landmark decision for African Americans. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it is unconstitutional to racially segregate schools.
As in Brown versus the Board of Education, it has to be thrust upon them, or they might not do it. And that's the benefit of laws, I used to say as a former member of Congress, is that there are things you want to change, but sometimes they won't move unless you mandate it. And then people learn how to live with it.
Well, first of all, before I went in and started the school in Poolesville, I hadn't heard of Brown versus Board of Education. Never heard the term.
On August 17, 1954, a 19-member advisory committee on integration was named. Their job was to come up with recommendations on how to implement the court decision. The following year, in 1955, Superintendent Forbes H. Norris had begun integration of Montgomery County. Phase 1, the Down County schools, went smoothly. Phase 2, on the other hand, is when Poolesville caused trouble.
So what happens is, in 1955, they integrate a number of schools down county, in Montgomery County. And it goes largely without a lot of opposition. There's no one protesting. But that also allowed the segregationists to sort of prepare, right? And so they decided that they were going to fight in 1956.
I traveled 45 minutes one way to school every day. So it was an opportunity, but also it was a challenge, an adventure. My parents applied for my transfer to Poolesville, and I didn't know it. I didn't find out I was going to Poolesville until maybe July, 2 months before school started.
At 8 a.m. on Tuesday, September 4th, 1956, Parents and students are reported to already gather outside the front of the high school.
A lot of questions about what would happen, how it would happen. And the day it was desegregated, there were crowds here, in the hundreds, out front, protesting. They actually brought the buses in the back. They sort of snuck the kids in. And I mean, that's sort of how it started.
The first day, I got on a bus in front of my house, which was on Route 107. It's now, I think, Fisher Avenue. And rode the bus to school. There was an officer on the bus to sort of, I guess, guarantee my safety. Got to school, and there was a mob at school. Maybe 7, 8 people lines deep to block any entrance into the cafeteria area where registration was to take place. Mr. Crawford, the newly assigned principal at the school, came out and escorted the 9 of us. There were 9 students attending that day, African-American students. Escorted us to the rear of the school, and we came in through a door that led back into the cafeteria where we registered for class.
Someone, and I don't know that we know who, I assumed it was the Montgomery County police officer in charge at the site at the day. Got on the radio. The buses had radios then. Got on, in essence, their simple CB thing and said, go in through the back.
You get to school and you see this mob of people, lines of people, and some of them had these axe handles. I found out later that they got this from somebody in the South in Alabama that they advocated using axe handles, to beat people back and that type of thing. But I remember seeing those. I guess, that first day was probably the roughest that we had.
It was a zoo-like atmosphere. I mean, it was crazy. And if you're imagining, you're one of those 8 kids, man, it's a mob. And a mob in that time meant certain things. And it had to be kind of scary.
There was picket lines. There were lines of people that he remembered in his recollection who were good friends of the family, with signs that said, go home, and worse. He didn't understand it. He was going to be an 8th grader, I believe, at the time, and he couldn't quite figure out how these people had turned on him just because he wanted to go to Poolesville High School.
Well, my father probably didn't adjust as well as my mom. My father wouldn't come to the school. He just refused to do so. But he said, these people that I've known for ages, he used to be, one to go to if he needed something. My father was a concrete contractor. And, if he needed something done, he'd call him. But one of the first people you see in that line of folks trying to keep African Americans out of school.
And it was like once they got in the building, there was the crowd was almost defeated, for lack of a better term. So yeah, it was a hectic day. It wasn't like any other day. A police presence was here for much of the early part of the year, both in terms of before and after school. So when they were going home in the afternoon, it was the same kind of thing. And it's 2 sides of the coin, right? So you have the story of these kids who, are bravely coming into this building. They're actually coming through what must have looked like a mob to them, right? And there's all that cool stuff and sort of celebration on that side. But on the other side, you've got opposition, right? And I know a lot of the opposition came from outside the community. The guy sort of running the opposition was from down county. There were cars from other states in here, but there were local people.
But one of the major instigators or leaders of the protests here at Poole was from outside the area. He was a troublemaker who did this in Virginia. He did it in a few cities over there. When the integration came to Poolesville, he came.
He's the one who was writing letters to the editor, and he's the one who, when the news of the event was covered, is going to actually tell people, hey, if you don't want to integrate to school, don't let your children go to school. If you have a white kid enrolled at Poolesville Junior and Senior High, don't let them come to school.
Looking back on that day, one man emerges from the protesters and takes charge of the anti-integration movement at Poolesville. His name is Everett Sever.
I've seen no evidence of anyone locally inviting Everett Sever to start this, but Everett Sever starts by writing an editorial. He sets up an organization that's a pro-segregationist organization, and he becomes sort of the focus on that day. And so he was sort of the organizer as much as there was an organizer.
Everett Sever was born in Washington, D.C., but grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland. During the time of the integration, he lived in Kensington, Maryland, 25 miles away from Poolesville. He was a chairman for the Montgomery County chapter for the Maryland Petition Committee, a segregationist organization that was even tracked by the FBI for their hateful acts. Formerly employed as a program director at the popular radio station WRC, he was suspended for his segregationist actions.
So at one point, when it becomes clear that everyone who's getting in the building has gotten in the building, people, and we don't know who those people are, but we know they're coming to Everett Sever and they're like, we need to go meet what's next, kind of thing, right? And so they go out to talk about what's next. There were undercover police officers here, milling out with the crowd, looking for trouble. One of these undercover police officers actually sort of follows Everett Sever and joins the group. And they went to a local house in town and met and planned their next steps.
At 10:30 a.m., 40 of the 100 protesters returned to the front of the school bearing petitions demanding a school board hearing on the integration. There, they were met with Poolesville High School Principal Robert T. Crawford and Superintendent Forbes Norris. Here, Everett Sever announced,
"We're going to demand a hearing before the school board for this perpetration they put us on. There will be a protest meeting at the town hall at 8 tonight and every night this week until we work out a solution to this problem."
He was met with lustily cheers and applause as he addresses the parents.
"We're not supposed to send our kids to school until we have a hearing. Keep your kids out of school every day this week."
Norris requested.
"Can't you boil your group down to a few?"
Sever snapped.
"You got plenty of room in there."
He then claimed the large group was a committee, and this was just the American way. The group was invited into the auditorium with 11 police officers standing guard. The principal and Norris were berated by demands and threats. Sever yelled,
"If we don't get a hearing soon, we'll march to Rockville."
Norris replied,
"It is not wise to threaten."
The crowd and parents dispersed by noon. Later that day at 8 p.m., a group of 182 Poolesville men, women, and children jammed in the town hall in protest over the integration of the high school. It is reported that parents of 154 Poolesville pupils were at the meeting. The next couple of days, the number of picketers falls. On Friday the 7th at 10 a.m., 37 people in the picket line stood out in front of the school grounds near the Poolesville Baptist Church. The protesters include many parents and students who regularly attend the school. It is also reported that at least one preschooler was present. During the day, the protesters advance on the school grounds, but are quickly repelled by the police guarding the school. Later, at 10:20 p.m., 60 Poolesville protesters march in parade style on the Rockville Courthouse on Jefferson Street. This march forced the county courthouse to adjourn. Within minutes, 20 Montgomery County police officers arrived and instructed the protesters to disband. Within 5 minutes, the majority of the crowd dispersed. The remaining few circulated around the Rockville area. It is believed that because of the fall in numbers of protesters throughout the week, this protest was to gain a larger audience. This stunt seemed to be in vain.
That the entire community resistance to integration lasted about 10 days, because it started on the first day of school, when I believe, and I'm not going to say specific, I believe 46% of the student body stayed home in protest. Somewhere around 50% stayed home because they were against it. But what does that tell you? It also tells you another 50% did not protest. So we never want to lose sight of the fact that there were people not protesting. And that was what I was getting at. And what you'll find when you research is that 2 days later, it became less and less. And that by September 17th, 10 days later, 90% of the student body was in school. So that means the vast majority of the protesters, I'm not saying they were any more happy about it, but they had stopped protesting and they were starting the process of accepting the situation.
They kind of accepted what they had to accept. No, I did not find any of the teachers there that were for segregation. At least they never said it. Maybe they never said it to me. They just went along with what was going on.
I attended class that day. That evening, things started to happen that, well, sort of expected. People riding by, shouting, name calling, throwing stuff in your yard. That went on for about 3 months. There came a point where, shooting spitball, rubber bands, it becomes real nasty when you start using paper clips, and breaking the paper clips and shooting those things. That happened at school. The cat calls, you can imagine, the N-word for some reason is coming back today. Why, I don't know. But call all kind of other things, coons, you can't imagine, what you had to go through. That's the statement I made earlier about being sorry about my attendance and tenure there, only because it affected my ability to achieve a good education, to get a good education at Poolesville. There was something to deal with every day for about the first year and a half.
For English, I would get essays written by the high school students saying that immigration was wrong, and they would cite the Bible even. It was very interesting. They came from well-respected, educated families, but they would justify in different ways the fact that there should be separate schools.
Going to school every day was always an adventure. There's just different things happening every day. I mean, you go sit down in class, somebody puts tacks in your seat. Not one. They'd go to extremes to trouble to put down 5 or 6 tacks. So if you brush one off, you still might sit on the other. And now when you look back, it was funny. At that time, it was not.
I would have maybe 1 or 2 blacks in a class, and they were indeed singled out. I became rather close to several of those black students. Well, there were so few of them, I was so concerned about them and about how they were going to interact. One, her mother wrote me a note, I will never forget. Wrote me a note and said, "Dear Mrs. Morella, please don't get yourself into trouble trying to help my daughter. She will be all right." And I thought, now, isn't that interesting? Another lad, he knew how to kind of break the barrier in a way. How? Through sports. That says something about the the benefit of sports in terms of teammanship, working together, and the desire to win.
After the first year, the second year we were there, I went out and tried out for athletic teams. I tried out for baseball, made the team. I tried out for soccer, I made the team. And I tried out for basketball, I made the team. So we were a Class C school that only had soccer, baseball, and basketball. I played all of those sports, had a lot of fun doing that. Made a lot of friends. I mean, people that are still friends that live in the Poolesville area.
I find that there's a lot of stories of close friendships between whites and blacks here in Poolesville. So I don't know how quickly the friendships began to develop, but clearly among the students, I think they adjusted probably quite quickly.
As a matter of fact, the harassment didn't continue to my senior year. Because at that point, everybody knew it wasn't going to be accepted. Mm-hmm. And there were a number of African American students there that could make a real impact, if they wanted to.
It's ironic that after what he had gone through at Poolesville, that he would grow up and have a family and raise his children in Poolesville, and all three of his children attended Poolesville High School, graduated from Poolesville High School, and obtained their college education based on the education they got at Poolesville High School. So he went the extra mile, and because folks somewhere along the line helped him, taught him, nurtured him, and guided him.
I can say I got a lot of support from several teachers. The reason I ended up at Maryland Eastern Shore as a biology major was basically because of a teacher named Albert Sycheski. He tell me all the time, George, you gotta think about it, prepare yourself, go there, till I graduated in 1961. So I was there about 5 years.
It is interesting, by the time we roll into 1957, like the story's kind of gone. And Everett Sever sort of disappears from the scene again. There are poppings in 57 and in 58, but even by 57, it feels like integration is sort of done. Like, this is the battle in this county for it, or in this part of the state. So you're not quite sure exactly what's motivating him. Is it really the race issue, or is he trying to use the race issue for some sort of hoping to launch some sort of political career? Like, that's kind of a big fuzzy area. I'm not sure if he was an opportunist or if he was, literally trying to draw the line in the sand. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter. He's clearly on the wrong side of history. So.
A fight that I had, student never came back to school. Why, I don't know, but after that day, I took on a different, not role, but I think I had a different attitude about my presence there. Prior to that day, I felt that I had to do something exceptional to be accepted into that congregation, into that atmosphere. And I was working hard trying to do that, make myself, acceptable in that situation. That wasn't my job. My job was to go there and get an education. And to this day, I regret all of the things that happened because it interfered with my ability to achieve a solid education and, to kind of make my point in life and move to the points or to the place that I wanted to be in life. I think my experiences at Poolesville hindered that. It kind of held it up a bit, and I don't believe I was afforded the full value of an education.
I'd like to think that a lot of them have changed their attitudes and opinion about youngsters going to school together and being educated at the same level. And being a member of the community now, for as long as I've been a member of the community, I see that the pervasive attitude is that education is the most important thing, not who's sitting beside you in the classroom.
We can measure progress from it. We can learn from it. We can move ahead because of it. This is a great example of moving ahead, a great community that doesn't understand. And given the situation, they move ahead. And now they've become an incredibly important contributing community, contributing to the nation.
So 56 in some ways is a long time ago, but it's still within living memory, right? There are people who came in this building, they're still alive. And there were people who were opposing this who are still alive. And there's sort of repercussions to our actions as individuals, but our actions sort of collectively.
I think it's also really important to note that while 9 students the first day, maybe the first couple of days, entered Poolesville High School under duress, 15 African American students, so 7 more students joined them during the course of the year. And I hail them as heroes, and I see them as heroes. Because these young students had no idea at the time that they were not only breaking barriers for their race, but keeping the doors of a high school that was probably earmarked to close. Because just prior to 1956, Poolesville High School only graduated 25 students. Prior to that, 24. So the numbers were going down for whatever reason. I think that the community was shrinking at the time. But I think it's important to note that even today, and those students who survived paid a heavy price. They did as far as their emotional stability was concerned, and their ability to cope with the rest of their lives, because it was quite an ordeal.
Poolesville has held many events, such as the Black Lives Matter March, a teaching on the African American history in Poolesville, and the George Peck Remembrance Service, who was the African American that was lynched in 1880. All of these events are an example of the progress and atonement for Poolesville's past mistakes. The high school now has a strong minority presence and influence on the school, while being the 34th best public school in the country. While the school is now being renovated, parts of the old buildings will remain. These parts will stay as a reminder of our history for the rest of the students to come. With a new school being built, it is easy to forget the past, but it is important that we learn and process the events that took place in this historic building. We have to continue to move forward and strive for a better future where everyone feels welcome in this small town we call home.